After rewatching Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3, I just realized there seems to be another reason Rocket doesn't like to be called an animal outside of the obvious, and it makes his MCU origin story somehow even sadder. Rocket Raccoon's tragic backstory in the MCU timeline was teased from his first ever on-screen appearance, but only fully revealed 9 years later. Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 3 showcased Rocket's youth as one of the High Evolutionary's experiments and explained his feelings about being called an animal were in part due to the villain treating him as disposable because he was just an animal. However, there's another equally upsetting reason the character appears to have this reaction to being called an animal. One of the first things we learn about Rocket in Guardians of the Galaxy is that he is very unhappy with being referred to as a raccoon, since he reacts to Quill's comment about him being one with considerable fury. While one of the most dramatic reactions Rocket has to be called an animal, it's by no means the last. Rocket reacts with some displeasure when Gamora refers to him as a rodent during their Klin prison escape, and has a truly angry outburst about Drax calling him vermin in nowhere, underlining his feelings about this at the time. However, that doesn't stop him from being called a hamster later by one of the Nova Corps during the movie's ending. Things don't stop there by any means, either. Thor repeatedly calls Rocket a rabbit in Avengers. Infinity War, Star-Lord calls Rocket a raccoon again in Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2, and then says he's actually a trash panda. And Yondu similarly calls Rocket a rat. Mantis even calls Rocket a puppy, though she's quickly bitten when she tries to pet him, with even Nebula and Ego calling Rocket by different animal names, a fox and a triangle-faced monkey, to be specific. Almost every character that meets Rocket calls him some variation of an animal. Looking back at Rocket's history, his frustration at almost all of these moments seems to connect to one overlooked angle of his origin story. First and foremost, Rocket's frustrated reaction is clearly both about how often he is called an animal despite demonstrating advanced capabilities, and because it's a reminder that he was mistreated and then almost killed off simply because he looked more animalistic than the High Evolutionary wanted his civilized beings to be. However, there does seem to be more to this. Throughout Rocket's MCU story, we rarely ever see him act in animal-like ways. Despite being compared to almost every mammal under the sun, we only really see him revert to a more animal-like state once, when he attacks the High Evolutionary as a cub. At the end of Rocket's backstory, the character is overcome with rage about the news that the High Evolutionary intends to kill him, Lila, Teefs, and Floor, essentially, because they look too much like animals to him. After the villain shoots Lila, Rocket gives a long, harrowing scream and claws viciously at the man's face. This means being compared to an animal may remind Rocket of his only real animalistic moment, and could also remind him of what's connected to that. That this rage prevented him from acting earlier to save his other friends, and potentially preventing their deaths. This ultimately makes his responses to being called an animal take on an extra tragic layer. During the scene of Rocket mauling the High Evolutionary, Floor and Teefs can be heard begging Rocket to stop so they can all run. Something Rocket seems to not register as he continually attacks the man who killed Lila. Though Rocket eventually relents to shoot 2 approaching guards, they're able to shoot Floor and Teefs, leaving Rocket on his own. Though it's entirely understandable that Rocket was blinded by rage for these moments, it also seems they were crucial ones that could have allowed the trio to escape together. This is especially true given it appears as though Floor and Teefs focus on begging Rocket to run with them versus finding a safe space to run or hide. As such, it's easy to see how there could also be a level of guilt for Rocket in being called an animal due to his one more animalistic moment being linked to his friends' deaths. This may also have convinced Rocket the High Evolutionary was right about him on some level for some time. Based on his overall arc, Guardians of the Galaxy's Vol. 3's ending features a striking end to Rocket's arc about hating being called an animal, even when said animal is the one species he in fact is.